Hey guys, and today I want to talk to you about two games that I didn't finish. Now these two games are both in the same series, and they are Descent and Descent 2. Now, basically what Descent is it's a first-person shooter, but it's also one of the first 6 directions of flying games. Now what does this mean, you ask? Well, basically, like first-person shooters, it's basically just like you shoot everything and it's in first person. However, there's a difference. In Descent, you're controlling a spaceship. Now, this spaceship can move forward, backwards, and it can also strafe left and strafe right, but you can also move vertically up and vertically down. This is what people like to call 6 directions of flying, and it's a genre that kind of has a niche audience. And Descent kind of pioneered this genre, as it was one of the first games, if not the first game of its kind. Now, I want to talk about Descent as a first-person shooter, as a 6-DoF game. Like, there aren't that many 6-DoF games to really talk about that aren't indie, or aren't Descent, or Forsaken. Like, let's put it this way, there's very few of them, and it's a very niche genre, but as a first-person shooter, I can definitely talk about this game and compare it to other first-person shooters. So, I want to talk about how this game is really underrated, and it really is. Like, this is probably one of the most underrated first-person shooters of all time. Now, when I say that, I'm aware that this game does have a cult following, and a lot of people like give this game a lot of praise, or this series a lot of praise, and they do, but the thing about it is, and this is what has always bothered me, Doom has always received more praise from people, and it's always the game that everybody brings up when it comes to old school first person shooters. But here's the thing, Descent, I think Descent was far more revolutionary than Doom was, and I'm going to explain this. So, now I understand that Doom was one of the first and it came out before Descent, so that's understandable, but in terms of how revolutionary this game is compared to Doom, the reason why I think that is the case is simply because this game was one of the first first-person shooters, if not the first, to add verticality. Now, in case you're wondering what verticality is, it's basically the ability to aim up and down. Because in Doom, if you were fighting an enemy that was above you, but like right in front of you, and you shot, it would kill the enemy regardless of whether or not they were above you or below you. It would still kill them because they are in front of you. In other words, Doom only works on the X-axis. And many of the games that were derivative of Doom that were released around the same time were also only on the X-axis. Now, I don't know of any other games that were released on the Y-axis before Descent. If anyone knows of any games that were released on the Y-axis, that were released around this time that had the Y-axis in mind, like that involved playing with the use of like Y-axis aiming, then do leave that in the comments and tell me what it is, because I want to know. But other than that, like, Descent is definitely one of the first games to have this like Y-axis aiming, and not only that, but it also allowed you to move up and down, left and right, forward and back, which is a big deal, because this game did a lot of things. Now, the thing about it is, and the reason why I think this game is kind of underrated, is because, yes, it did a lot of things, but nobody really asked for them. Like, yeah, the whole idea sounds cool, but people would much rather just play as a badass military dude and shoot demons in the face. They don't want to shoot things as a pilot in a freaking spaceship. Like, that's not cool. And yeah, I think that's why Doom is a lot more famous than this series. As yes, a lot of people praise this series, but it's definitely not as famous as Doom, and that's kind of why, because the premise, really, like, the premise in Descent is a little bit more complicated than Doom, and I think that's why a lot of people aren't into it as much. But still, that aside, Descent is still a noteworthy game, especially since it was released only in 1994 at the latter end. And believe it or not, Descent was originally released in Europe before anywhere. So yeah, take that, America. Anyways, as a game released in 1994, which was in the latter end of 1994, that's a pretty big deal because that means that the game was released around the same time that many of the Doom clones were released, and I think Doom 2 was released around this point, I'm not sure, but yeah. So, considering that, this is a pretty revolutionary game if you ask me. But not only that, also the fact that this game is one of the few games that actually bothered to have fully 3D graphics. Now, it's not the only game to be in fully 3D, but it is one game out of many that chose the proper 3D look. Now, what I mean by proper 3D is that it's not like Doom where like everything's a sprite, but it's got this 3D effect, or like it looks 3D. What I mean is that it's actual 3D, like everything, it's all 3D models. So this is a proper 3D game, which is unlike anything like any Doom clone is pretty much, which is a big deal for its time. So that's another thing that's revolutionary about Descent, and quite honestly I think people really need to pay more attention to this series, especially when talking about like first-person shooters and like what revolutionized first-person shooters, and I think more games need to pay attention to this series because it was revolutionary for its time and it deserves to be acknowledged for that. In any case, let's talk about my opinions on the game itself as like, well, first of all I'm going to talk about Descent because it is the first of the bunch. Now, a lot of this will apply to Descent 2 as well because both games are similar, but basically I will talk about, first of all, what I like about Descent. So, I haven't finished Descent, I haven't finished Descent 2, which is kind of obvious considering this is games I haven't finished, but I got to around, I think, level 10 in Descent, if I recall. I kind of forget which level I got to, but it's around that mark, and basically I got to a point where I was like, well, let's put it this way, I got to a point where I was like up against some really tough enemies. So yeah, I basically got to level 10. I think I got to level 10. But I don't remember enough. So basically I got to a certain point. So I'd say that I have experienced enough of it to be able to have an opinion on it. Although I don't think some people would agree, but you know, like, I think I get the gist of what this game's all about, so yeah. So basically what I like about this game. Now, the first thing I like about this game is how it allows you to obtain lots of different weapons. Yeah, there's tons of weapons in this game. Like, you have the basic laser, you have the Vulcan, you have the Spreadfire cannon, and you also have the fusion cannon. And they all operate pretty differently. Oh, and you also have the quad laser, which is pretty cool as well. So you have different weapons, which allows you to change things up, and each weapon has its own uses. And basically, you're probably going to want to swap weapons just depending on what you're fighting and stuff. So yeah, it can be quite handy to experiment with lots of different weapons. But also, as I say, there are two different forms of ammunition. You have the Vulcan weapon, which uses basic ammunition, which is, you can find Vulcan ammunition around, and yeah, it's basically just regular, like, bullets and stuff. But the laser and Spreadfire and fusion cannons and, like, the quad laser, they all use energy. And basically you can find energy around each level, and there's also places, kind of like the pit stops in F-Zero, which recharge your energy. So yeah, there's that. And you can kill enemies as well, which drop energy, so yeah, there's many ways to refill your energy, but you do want to make sure you have plenty of it, because if you run out of energy, it becomes pretty difficult to deal with enemies. And yeah, so I think when you run out of energy, you swap to your Vulcan and you use that, but the Vulcan has limited ammo as well. So basically, you want to keep topped up on energy in this game, because you're going to need it. In any case, the other things that I like about this game are the visuals. I like the visuals of this game, especially for its time, and plus I kind of have a soft spot for like old school style visuals, and this game has a lot of great ones. Like, particularly Descent 2, but I'll get to that later on. But Descent 1 still looks pretty nice for its time, and it has this really nice old school look to it, which, if you like games like Doom and you like the style and look of those types of games, you'll love the look of Descent. It's like Doom, but better in its appearance, at least in my opinion. A lot of people would disagree with that, and I can kind of see why. I mean, Doom did have some nice looking levels, but I just really like the style that the game goes for. Like, I suppose it's just a personal preference, but I do like the old school style visuals this game has, and yes, it hasn't aged as well as games today, but I think there's still some charm to them. I mean, if you were to play, like, another Six Directions of Flying game, and it had, like, more modern visuals, it just wouldn't be the same as these old school style, like, visuals, and I just really like them. It's just a personal preference. I want to see more games have this style and look to them, rather than just being like, this is the thing, a lot of indie developers, they have like this kind of like Minecraft-like level aesthetic, and I just think it looks ugly. Just go back to what these games did. Go back to how these games look like. A bit like how Dusk has gone back to this style in a way, which I can appreciate, although I'm not sure that Dusk is fully 3D, but it might be. I'm not so certain, but basically it's the same sort of thing as the new, like, anniversary Duke Nukem 3D game. So yeah, in the sense that it's fully 3D and stuff. So yeah, that's what this game's kind of like. And I really like these visuals a lot. And yeah, I basically just like the general gameplay of this game in general, and how you like shoot enemies and kill them. I think, yeah, there's not really much to it, but I like how, you know, you watch the enemies explode when you kill them, and how you're using each different weapons to deal with different situations and stuff. That's what I like about the game. And yeah, I think the effects, I guess that's another thing that I like about this game, because there's a lot of great special effects that are like old school looking special effects. But simply, I like this game because it's old school, I guess. I like old school looking games. I just do. I think more games need to look like this in the future. I mean, I do like my more modern looking games, don't get me wrong, but sometimes you just want to go back and play like an old school style game because of how it looks, and these looks haven't aged badly at all. Like, you can still play these games and appreciate how they look, because they, as I say, they have some charm to them. But the same goes for the effects. Like, when you're watching the enemies explode and stuff, it really, there's an impact to that. And I think that impact really makes the gameplay more engaging, because it makes you feel like your shots really have an impact on the enemy when you're hitting them, and it just makes things just so much more exciting when you're just blowing tons of enemies up with weapons. But yeah, and finally, the last thing that I want to talk about, what I like about Descent, is the soundtrack. The soundtrack of Descent. Now, I want to talk about the Red Book soundtrack specifically, because I mainly played the PlayStation version of Descent, although I did play a bit of the PC version, and I'm going to get into that later, but let's put it this way, I didn't like it. But I played the PlayStation version of Descent and Descent 2. Now, if you live in America, the PlayStation version of Descent 2 is called Descent Maximum, just putting that out there. But yeah, I played those two games on PS1, and the PS1 version has the Red Book soundtrack. And the Red Book soundtrack is awesome. It is a really awesome soundtrack. There's some great tracks in there, a lot of techno, a lot of metal. I just love the soundtrack. It just really gets you pumped to play more Descent, and it's probably one of the things I like the most about this game, about both games really, as it just really gets you pumped. I just love the music. Like, the music is just great to listen to on its own. Even if you don't plan on playing any of the Descent games, you really need to listen to the soundtracks of both games, because the music is awesome. I really think the music in this series is underrated, and more people need to listen to it. So yeah, those are mainly the things I like about Descent. And it's kind of like odd things to like about the game, like the visual style, even though it's like old school and stuff, but I guess I just like it, and it's simple, and yeah. But now I want to talk about what I don't like about Descent. Now, a lot of these are personal things, but, like, as we all know, I'm pretty nitpicky when it comes to games, so the things that I didn't like about Descent are the key cards. Now, this is particularly an issue in Descent 1, as Descent 1 has, as I say, the Descent games have maze-like level design, like Doom does, but the first Descent especially can be pretty difficult to figure out where you're actually going half the time, because it's easy to get lost. Even though the game does have a map, like, you'll usually end up switching the map on and off all the time, because you want to, like, see where you're going, and it's so easy to get lost in these games, or at least the first game. Now, this is something that Descent 2 fixed, but in the first game, this is pretty problematic, as I hate getting lost in games and looking for key cards, and yeah, that is definitely a problem with Descent 1. And to be perfectly honest, I've never really cared much for the whole idea of key cards, and never liked that form of level design. I've never really been keen on, like, the maze-like structure of levels. I've always preferred more large arenas for first-person shooters than mazes. Just never been keen on them. In a way, you could argue that Descent isn't really for me in that sense, because it is basically more of a maze-like first-person shooter. If you like games like Doom, for example, for being maze-like and stuff, then yeah, you'll probably like this style of level design, but it's just not for me. Although I will say that I do like how it looks in terms of aesthetics. I'm not too keen on how it plays, let's put it that way. But yeah, keycards, not my kind of thing. I don't personally like keycards at all. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is a big problem in the first Descent, and I could talk about enemy placements, but I think there's more to it than just that. Basically, the enemies themselves. Now, what I mean by this is that there's some enemies in this game which are just ridiculous, and I mean ridiculous. But first of all, I want to talk about the enemy placements, because Descent in particular tends to like to troll the player by placing enemies in the worst possible places ever. Now, Descent was made by the same people who made Red Faction, and Red Faction is notorious for this, as in Red Faction you open the door and there's enemies like surrounding you in front of you, and you have to kill them, but they all hit you before you even get a chance to do anything. Like, they just appear like right in front of you and start shooting at you immediately. And yeah, there's some pretty annoying enemy placement in Red Faction, and that's a game that I really didn't like. I wasn't keen on Red Faction at all. There was just nothing to like about it. But you can kind of see how Red Faction was made by the same people, as it does have a similar aesthetic, but at the same time, I just wasn't keen on Red Faction. Though I can't say that I completely hated Descent. I thought this series was pretty decent. I like the concept of this series. That's another thing I like about Descent. I like the concept of it, like the whole, like, going into mines and in a spaceship. I mean, the whole claustrophobic level design in a spaceship kind of feels weird. I mean, it's not like it makes sense. You'd think that if you were controlling a spaceship that you'd be in, like, wide open areas, kind of like Wing Commander or something like that, but no, this is actually, like, in, like, very tight levels and stuff that you're actually flying in. I just think it's interesting how they picked that. Like, they could have gone with something like Wing Commander where it's like open-ended, and you could argue that they kind of did in Free Space, because in a way, like, Free Space was originally a Descent game in name, at least, although it has absolutely nothing to do with Descent, and it's not really a Descent game as such. The original Free Space was called Descent Free Space, so I like to call Descent Free Space the Descent game that actually decided to be like your typical open levels and like open space and stuff. Yeah, it was the first, I consider it the first Descent game to be in open space in a way. Well, I'm not sure about Descent 3, I think that might have a few bits that are in open space, but I'm not sure. But I know that Free Space definitely focused on like open space battles, and if you were looking for open space battles, this is not the game for you. If you're looking for open space battles, you want to play Descent Free Space, because there's plenty of them in that game. But I still think that this series, or at least the first two Descent games, are kind of interesting because, like, they have this, like, cool concept of, like, flying a spaceship through, like, these tight spaces. I think that's pretty cool. But at the same time, this comes to another problem, and that's, it can be really difficult to move around in this game. Because the levels are pretty tight, it can be difficult to like fly about sometimes, as you're usually like trying to like avoid attacks, but you don't want to fly into a wall, and it can be pretty tricky to move around in these games. I mean, especially if you're playing like the PlayStation version. As the PlayStation version, you feel very slow, and yeah, it can kind of feel a bit awkward sometimes. As sometimes, like, I don't know if you can turn this off, but I've noticed that when I'm playing the PlayStation version, when the terrain changes, my ship kind of automatically moves with the terrain, and that can be quite annoying at times, because it's like, I want to aim straight ahead, but the ship's moving me down, so I have to turn my nose up just to shoot this guy, and that takes time. As like the turning sensitivity isn't that brilliant in Descent on the PlayStation, but here's another problem. The turning sensitivity on PC, or at least when I did play the PC version, is even worse. Like, I tried to move the mouse and it barely tilted the nose to the left and the right. So I had a lot of issues when I was playing the PC version, and that's the reason why I chose to play the console version, because I could not play this game with keyboard and mouse. Now, I'm presuming that you really should be playing this game with a joystick or something, because, like, I don't know, I'm just guessing that's what you're supposed to do, but I didn't really want to invest in a joystick just for this game, and yeah, I just refunded the game on Steam, and yeah. But I eventually, as I say, picked it up later on PlayStation and gave it another go. So yeah, that's one problem that I have with the game, and it's basically the controls, as I say, like, or more like how the ship controls. I mean, the controls themselves, like on the PlayStation port, aren't that bad. Like, they could have been so much worse. Like, I've played worse PlayStation 1 ports, and the PlayStation 1 port of Descent is actually pretty good. Same with Descent 2. Like, I mean, Descent 2 adds a lot more features, and I still don't know how to use half of them. So, like, I don't know how to, like, use the afterburners, or, like, bring up the headlights or anything, but Descent 1 is pretty straightforward, as it doesn't really have all that, so it's not as difficult to like figure out what you're supposed to do to move your ship. So in a way, I don't really have a problem with the controls themselves, more like how the ships themselves control. That's where my problems are with the game, as I just think that, I mean, yeah, if you have a joystick, it's probably better, and maybe it's just me being terrible at the game, and it probably is, but let's put it this way, the game isn't very intuitive when it comes to controlling the ship, and you'll figure that out very quickly. So, basically, that's the controls. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is some of the enemies in this game, and this is the reason why I never finished the original Descent, or at least part of the reason. The fact that I ended up fighting some really tough enemies. Now, once you reach level 6 in Descent, you encounter an enemy called Vulcan Drillers, and these enemies have hit scan Gatling guns. Now, in a game where, for the most part, it's about like avoiding projectiles, which is what you'll be doing for the most part, and you'll get used to that, like avoiding enemy projectiles and shooting back at them, and it's kind of fun. That's another thing that I like about the game, how it's mostly like you're avoiding the projectiles and you're shooting back, and then you avoid the projectiles, shoot back, and, you know, that's kind of how the game works. But when you fight against these hit scan enemies, it's an absolute pain in the ass, because they place them in the worst possible position, like around corners. You go around the corner and instantly you start losing tons and tons of health, and the best way to deal with these enemies is to use homing missiles around the corners so that you don't actually encounter them. Fortunately, as I say, there's a lot of weapons, including missiles, that you can use, and they can be really handy, especially in the first Descent. My god, you'll use missiles a lot in the first Descent. In Descent 2, not so much, as there are other weapons on offer. I'll talk about Descent 2's differences later, but basically, these enemies annoy me, and there's more than just the Vulcan Drillers, there's also the Super Hulks. These guys are also placed in really annoying places as well, and yeah, it can be a pain in the ass to deal with those guys, as they will shoot homing missiles at you, and it's basically nearly impossible to avoid them. I guess that you could avoid them if you're like moving quickly, but I'm not sure. So yeah, I haven't tried it, but still, I'm just not a fan of those enemies. Like, the Super Hulks take forever to kill as well, so you're going to have to deal with them for a long time, so they're just not fun, and they place tons of them around. And when I got to, like, I think it's level 10, I'm not sure, but basically the level I got to, the first thing, it was basically like very open, which is kind of surprising at the start. But there was a Super Hulk in the wall, and it started shooting at me, and yeah, I killed him, and I went down, and there's another Super Hulk in the wall, and it was just a pain in the ass. And there was a Vulcan Driller just right below him. And yeah, I was just like, I give up. Oh, and there was also another enemy, which was a cloaked enemy, which started sniping me from like the bottom left-hand corner, and I'm like, this is a pain in the ass. And it's because of this enemy placement and like, I don't want to say it's the level design, it's mostly the enemy placement. But the combination of the absolutely atrocious enemy placement and the hit scanning enemies just kind of ruined Descent for me. And that's why I stopped playing Descent 1. But there's also Descent 2, which is also a game I didn't finish. So I want to get to that. And yeah, Descent 2 has a few differences to Descent 1, and I want to talk about them. Now, the first difference is the guide bot, which is a big deal because it means that you don't get as lost in the levels anymore. And as such, I find that the levels feel a lot smaller in Descent 2, at least in the PlayStation versions. But I think this is a good thing, as like, you'd spend hours in a level in Descent 1 not knowing where the hell you're going and getting lost, whereas in this game it just feels a lot quicker and stuff, and I like that, because you can just get straight to the point and kill the enemies and then get to the end. And in addition to that, there's more weapons and stuff, which are really cool. Like, you've got the Gauss cannon, and you've got more missiles, like, right from the get-go. Like, another thing about Descent that was really difficult is a lot of the good equipment is really hard to get. Like, if you wanted to get something like smart missiles, it would take ages to, like, get them. But in Descent 2, you can get them pretty easily, and it just makes things better because you have more options available to you. Other than that, it is more or less the same, except from the levels look better in this game. Basically, everything is improved in Descent 2. Like, the levels kind of feel a lot more detailed, and I just like the aesthetic more. Like, put simply, while Descent's aesthetic looks nice enough, I think it does look a bit dated, whereas I think that Descent 2's aesthetic has aged better. And basically, if you are a fan of this old school look, you'll really love how Descent 2 looks, because it looks a lot better. And as I say, like, the levels themselves, they have more of an identity in terms of aesthetics, so they kind of have this sort of theme, like you have like lava levels and water levels and stuff, which is pretty cool. So yeah, that's one thing I do like about Descent 2, is that it just looks better. But also the music in Descent 2, basically, if you thought the music couldn't get any better in Descent 2 kicks it up a notch, particularly the metal tracks. The metal tracks in Descent 2 are freaking awesome, they really are. Like, the title music in itself just tells you everything you need to know. Like, the moment you start up the freaking game, it instantly starts playing freaking heavy metal. Like, that's basically what it's like. And then, you know, you've got your techno music, which is still pretty nice, as I say, and I think that overall it's an improvement. The soundtrack is an improvement. Basically, everything is better in Descent 2, so yeah. I'm probably wondering why I stopped playing Descent 2. Well, and here's the thing, I want to talk about, finally, why I stopped playing the games. And the reason why I stopped playing the games, as I say, is these games are challenging. These games are really hard. Especially the first game. Like, the first game is absolutely ruthless, but the second game can also be pretty hard as well. Now, the other thing that I don't like about this game, or both games, is the fact that they have way too many cloaked enemies. Now, this is something that I really don't like, as I really don't like being jumped in games. I don't like that. And these games tend to jump you a lot, particularly with the enemy placements and with a lot of these cloaked enemies. And I just think it's so cheap, and I just really don't like it, and it just makes me feel tensed up all the time. And I don't like feeling tensed up when I'm playing games. And this game really does make you feel tensed up a lot of the time, especially with these cloaked enemies. The worst of the bunch would have to be the freaking cloaked diamond claws. Like, these enemies are basically, they're kind of like, imagine if the Cacodemon was a robot. That's basically what they are, except this is a cloaked one. So basically, what did the Cacodemon do in Doom? They basically try to sneak up on you, but they kind of shoot projectiles as they move towards you, as they're trying to sneak around and get you while you're not looking or not paying attention. And that's basically what Diamond Claws do, but their AI is vastly superior to that of the Cacodemon. And while they don't look as horrifying as the Cacodemon, they kind of can be pretty scary to contend with, I'd say. And that goes for all of the lifters as well, like particularly like the advanced lifters. Those guys are really sneaky as well, and I don't really like dealing with them. And there's also some really annoying cloaked enemies, like in the first Descent you have like cloaked Vulcans, which are freaking annoying. Like take regular Vulcans, which are bad enough, and just make them cloaked. Yeah, that's definitely some annoying shit right there. But yeah, like, that's the thing, you see. This game, and especially considering the fact that it's very claustrophobic, in a way this game kind of feels like a horror game in a way, in that sense, because you're in a claustrophobic area, and there's all these robots that are trying to shred you to bits, and you have to, like, maneuver around and avoid them. Maybe it's the way I played, because I see that a lot of people play this game very quickly, but because I was playing the PS1 version, I was playing very slowly, and, you know, the game can get quite dark at times, and some of the music can actually get pretty creepy. Like, sometimes when I was playing Descent 2 and I was listening to the music, I was like, this music could probably work in Diablo or something like that, and it kind of could. Like, there's some really creepy tracks in this game. Like, in both games, I'd say, but, well, actually, I'd say mostly in Descent 2. Like, the music in Descent 2 can get really creepy. Oh, it can. And, yeah, this game, it's weird because you wouldn't think of it as a horror game, but it really does feel like it when you think about it, because, as I say, these tight claustrophobic levels with all these robots that some of them can be pretty lethal, as I say, and, yeah, they love to sneak up on you. And for that reason, yeah, like, I mean, I remember, because I was going through, I think it was level 8, and I basically went around, and I basically was just, I don't know, I was looking around for something, and suddenly I heard this scraping noise, and it was like this really horrendous scraping noise, and little did I know that an advanced lifter was literally right behind me, tearing my ship to pieces with its claws, and it scared the shit out of me. And yeah, like, that's basically the sort of thing that I'm talking about with jumping, and yeah, that's basically what the lifters and the Diamond Claws do. They basically trying to get close to you all the time. Like, you look at them on the surface and you think that they're not that lethal, but that's the thing, like, on the surface they're pretty easy to deal with, but they're actually sneaky little buggers, and what they're trying to do is catch you off guard so that they can get behind you and tear you to shreds. So you really have to pay attention to them all the time, and the worst part is when they seem to, like, appear behind doors and shit. Like, you open the door and there's one right in front of you and they're just charging at you. And yeah, also another thing about them, as I say, like, when you're fighting these Diamond Claws, they kind of like to move behind you a lot. And if you saw my stream playing Descent, you'll see, like, some of the Diamond Claws, like, they acted as if they were completely ignoring me and just moved past me. And they tend to do that a lot. And you think that it's just, you know, their AI isn't smart and that they're just stupid AI, but that's actually the opposite. They make you think that they're stupid so that they can get behind you and scrape you to bits. They make you forget that they're there. That's kind of what they're trying to do. And when you're not expecting them to hit you, they hit you, and yeah. That sort of thing, I get tensed up when I deal with that sort of thing, so yeah. But, yeah, that's basically one of the reasons why I stopped playing the game. And, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I can see a lot of enjoyment in this series, like, and that's why I want to get to the final bit. I want to talk about what I recommend this series to you, and I think if you're a big fan of old school first-person shooters, you owe it to yourself to play this game, and, well, both games especially. I definitely say Descent 2 is the better of the two. It is. In every single way, Descent 2 is better, and I definitely have to say that if you're going to play any of them, that's the one to play, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with playing the original Descent, unless you really don't like the whole idea of dealing with hit scan enemies. Like, if you get easily frustrated, it might not be for you, because, like, it can be frustrating at times. I mean, both games can be frustrating at times, but the thing is, I think there's some appeal to these games. I do think there is, and I think that these games are pretty good, but at the same time, I just think that these games just aren't for me. But would I recommend them to people, like, who have different tastes than me? Definitely. Especially if you like the whole idea of being in these claustrophobic spaces and, like, having to deal with, like, several different types of robots around, then yeah, this is definitely for you. I mean, especially if you like the whole aspect of being tensed up and not knowing what's around you at all times, because the AI in this game, or in both games, are very smart. The AI are quite possibly the scariest part of this game, and that's the thing. Like, the reason why this game is so scary to me is because the AI are so freaking intelligent. And you wouldn't think that that's a scary thing, but it kind of is, because you don't expect that. If you play like most first-person shooters, the AI is just dumb. Well, not all first-person shooters, but a lot of first-person shooters, the AI are just dumb. Not in these games. Oh no, the AI are smart, and because of that, it kind of adds like this whole like fear factor to the series, because you're in these claustrophobic levels and there's enemies that are very intelligent around them, and they could be coming to you or attacking you from anywhere, and you have to be ready for them. So awareness plays a big part in this game, as you have to be aware as to what's around you, where the enemies are, and also there's some secrets to find as well, and you can open up secret doors to get new equipment and stuff. But at the same time, and this is another way how the game likes to troll you with enemy placements, sometimes you'll open a door and it'll swarm you with enemies. Sometimes you'll fly into a room and then enemies will suddenly appear outside of these secret doors, and yeah, the game likes to throw traps at you a lot. And there's also enemies that like to leave proximity mines around as well, though I find that they're pretty easy to avoid overall. So yeah, I don't think they're that difficult to see, but let's put it this way, enemies are very crafty in this game, so if you want intelligent AI, then you're going to love these games, as there's plenty of intelligent AI in both of them. And yeah, definitely recommend Descent to people who are after that. But if you're the sort of person who doesn't like being tensed up in games, this might not be for you, and to be perfectly honest, I would say most old school first person shooters would not be for you either. Because a lot of first person shooters that are old school, even Doom, could leave you really tensed up a lot of the time as well. As I say, I might as well say it now because it kind of ties in, but yeah, I never finished Doom either, and the reason for that was kind of a similar reason, in the sense that I didn't like the Cacodemons and how they would sneak up on you. And plus, I also found their appearance to be pretty scary as well, so yeah, that definitely doesn't help. And yeah, a lot of old school first person shooters are like that. And if that's not scary enough, then you have games like freaking Hexen and Heretic, where there's booby traps everywhere, which just kill you instantly. And yeah, that sort of thing terrifies me, and that's why I don't play games with booby traps in them. So yeah, but what equally scares me is AI that are too smart for their own good, and Descent has that. And yeah, that's kind of the reason why I never finished these games, in a way. But I know that a lot of people would really enjoy these games and would probably be able to finish them, so I encourage you all to pick these games up if what I said about them sounded interesting to you, because I do think that these games are solid. I do think they are. Although they do have their flaws, I think they're still really fun and revolutionary games, and they deserve to be talked about more. More people need to talk about these games. The soundtracks of both Descent games are freaking awesome. They are, like, really good. I definitely recommend you check these games out, because they're awesome. Anyways, I'll see you guys later.